Four things you need to know about lower half mechanics, and they are drift, drop, rotate, and block. So let's start with number one, drift. What does drift mean? As you're lifting your leg, you are just drifting forward towards the plate a little bit. Not very fast, just a little bit. You just need a couple inches in front of the rubber. You know, people tell you all the time, stay back over the rubber, balance point, whatever else. It's wrong. Don't do it. You need to drift forward a little bit. Don't go too fast. You don't want to accelerate too fast. Just get your center of mass, so the center of your body, slightly in front of the rubber and your back foot. That's going to set you up to be able to use gravity to your advantage.
The oral Hershiser drill. Good job. All right, here we go. Measure it off, please. Put your landing foot, show the camera, put your landing foot against the wall. Pivot foot, twist. There's your rubber. Crossover, please. Preset your fanny.
So I just jumped off and had to land. Where would I land? That's about where your hinge should be. It's the most stable, efficient position that you can support load through your system. To really feel the glute load up, if you've never felt the connection there, it's just feeling it right there. You can do it, kind of put your eyes where the target would be, feel the glute. Feel the glute. That's essentially what you should feel as you begin the drive phase.
The oral Hershiser drill. Good job. All right, here we go. Measure it off, please. Put your landing foot, show the camera, put your landing foot against the wall. Pivot foot, twist. There's your rubber. Crossover, please. Preset your fanny. Lift and plant. Hard. 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead.
2, drop. This is the segment where we're utilizing gravity to create energy. And how do we do that? Well, when you drift a little bit in front of the rubber and then you start to drop your body down, instead of being straight up and down, you have a little bit of tilt. And so as you drop down, there gets to be more and more and more and more tilt. And so as you're creating more tilt, you go faster towards the plate. Tilt, when I talk about tilt, I'm talking about the back leg, okay? It's, if you angle it and you start to drop, there's the force vectors push you towards the plate without you having to actually push with your back leg towards the plate. And this is really important because when you actually drive to the plate or when you rotate to the plate, that's two very different things. If you drive, you're extending your back leg early. If you rotate, you're not, and you're positioning the hip socket the correct way to be able to send energy up the chain. So it's really important that you drift, and then when you drop, it creates the energy for you as you go down the mound. It positions the femur and the hip socket in the correct way where you can actually rotate the hips effectively instead of forcing the hips open or extending the back leg and creating a big spike in energy, but way too early in the delivery and throwing everything off. So number 2 is to drop.
Really difficult for us to be very dynamic in a vertical fashion and then all of a sudden start shooting laterally towards our target. Okay, it takes a very special kind of athlete to do something like that, but even still special athletes who don't do that. Special athletes do this move here, which is just before its peak of ascent, we start shifting our weight into the inside part of our back foot and we start going. Now let's talk back leg here. Since we just talked front leg. The back leg is great. The back leg, he's sitting into that back hip. His upper half is starting to coil around his back hip. So we see that little coil, that kind of counter action. I drew the line over, so let's draw it again. So our lower half is starting to go in descent towards home plate, and our upper half is going to resist that move and coil around our back hip here through pelvis control, femur control, all that type of stuff. But really, it just requires a lot of body awareness and a lot of understanding of what we're trying to accomplish as we're trying to move to home plate.
The foot, we're trying to get the weight right in the center of our foot, because by getting into the center of our foot, it's going to allow us to cover greater surface area. But what it's going to do is going to create more stability so that I can start to lower the hips and get them on track with the slope.
Number 3 is to rotate, and it's a big difference between rotating and driving or pushing or extending or anything else. Rotation happens by the back knee kind of rotates down, it gets lower, it turns over, but the back leg stays bent. And the hip socket, or the hip level I should say, stays even. So you go from this to this, you don't go and elevate or tilt or something like that. It's super important that you rotate, and I'll show you a couple examples here on the screen of people that are actually rotating versus people that are extending. The back knee needs to turn down. The back foot, actually, the mechanism for this is the back foot everts, so it rolls a little bit, and then the back knee turns down. You internally rotate a little bit in the hip socket, and the hips start to turn so that when your front foot lands, your hips have opened and they're about 45 degrees open, somewhere in that range. Doesn't have to be exact. And 45 degrees, I mean, for a righty, if facing towards third base, the third base and the first base angle is 90 degrees open, they would be somewhere between, kind of pointing off towards shortstop. Your back hip would be pointing towards shortstop, and your front hip would be somewhere towards the first base dugout. So they need to be open a little bit. You want to open your hips early, and if you do the first two steps here by drifting and dropping, you're probably going to be able to accomplish getting your hips open earlier. You want your hips opening as early as possible, and you want your torso delaying as long as possible. So you can rotate your torso as late as possible, but your hips rotate as early as possible. So number 3, just to recap, is to rotate. We don't want to drive. We don't want to extend. Yes, there is some driving going on, but it is because we have drifted and dropped. And so now as we start to rotate, gravity is doing the drive for us. It's creating the energy for us because we've positioned ourselves the correct way. Leads us to tip number 4, which is to block. And this is all about the front leg. In biomechanics, a block means that when a segment has completely stopped moving. So think of a car crash where the car hits something and everything in there just launches forward, or a whip. If you go to whip a towel or like a whip or bullwhip, you stop the handle and then the energy transfers up the chain. In order for the next segment to efficiently accelerate, the prior segment has to completely decelerate. So any time your front leg lands and there's any movement in it whatsoever, you're leaking energy, you're losing energy, which means there's less to transfer to your upper half, which means there's less to transfer to your arm and to the ball, so less velocity, and that's, as we know, not a good thing. That's not what we're after. So that's what block means. It means when you gotta land, your front leg has to be stiff. Now that doesn't mean it lands completely extended, but it lands and it firms up. And there's some different ways you can go about doing this. There's a lot of people in the big leagues that land open, they land closed, it doesn't really matter. It's just for your body, you need to be able to land and stop your front leg from moving and create a brace around it. The other part of this is actually what sparks all the energy up the chain, and this is the point where you actually start to throw hard or trying to throw hard. You should not try to throw hard prior to this. It's all about positioning prior to this. Once the front leg hits, if you've positioned your hips correctly, the front leg, the impulse of the front leg hitting will actually drive the hips open on its own. You don't have to do anything after that. You just position the hips so that when the front foot hits, that energy clicks the hips in and they finish off rotation. Then once they speed up and finish off rotation, the lower half is stopped completely, which means all the energy in the system is transferred up to the upper half, to the arm, and to the ball eventually. So blocking is super important. Everyone who talks about, oh, you got to land on a soft front side and, make sure that knee stays bent and be quiet, land on a piece of rice paper or something like that. Wrong. Don't do it. You want to have an explosive block. You want to hit and stop as abruptly as possible. There is probably too abrupt. You don't want to land with a stiff front leg that's completely locked out and hyperextend, anything like that. But you want that impact to be violent as long as you've set yourself up correctly beforehand. So these are the things that matter. Number 1, don't mess yourself up. Just don't do it. It makes no sense. Don't mess yourself up. And what I mean by that, don't get your arms in all these weird positions. Throwing is a natural movement. A lot of people say it's not, but you can go back and look at caveman drawings on walls and they're throwing spears, and I'm pretty sure they weren't playing a game. They were just doing something natural to hunt, and they figured out a better way to do it than just running around and trying to tackle saber-toothed tigers or something. Important thing number 2 is the arm spiral. If you didn't do anything dumb, and you didn't mess yourself up in step 1, you're probably in a position somewhat like this-ish, okay? The next thing that happens is your front foot lands and your throwing arm scap retracts a little bit, and then your elbow is actually going to roll. So this is what's called the arm spiral. The ball is here, and your elbow is going to roll, and it creates almost a spiral staircase. There's an old Japanese book talking about pitching mechanics that actually shows a spiral staircase for how the ball is supposed to unwind and come out of the hand. But that's what it is. It's scap retraction, and then you go into external rotation and supination of the forearm. And then as the arm unwinds, you direct the forearm towards the plate, and then that ties in with pronation and internal rotation, and that's the throw. So don't do anything dumb and then spiral the arm. You are going to lead with your elbow. A lot of people say don't lead with your elbow. I've never seen anyone throw a ball leading with their hand. That's a push. You can't do that. You lead with your elbow. But you need to direct the forearm towards the plate so that you don't fly out and put your arm at risk of unnecessary injury. All right, but that's the second thing that you need to do. It's the spiral staircase, it's the arm spiral, it's scap retraction, supination, external rotation, leading into directing the forearm to the plate, pronation, and internal rotation. Velo comes from proper sequencing. Velo doesn't come early in the delivery. Nothing until foot plant even matters. You can't generate velocity until your front foot's on the ground anyway. So you don't need to do anything with your arm before that to generate velocity. It's just about getting it in a position that can work for you. Your arm accelerates it's the last thing to accelerate in the delivery. It happens the latest. Your lower body, and I talked about this last week, your lower body has to block and stop first before you can even transfer energy into the upper half. So why people are talking about how you take the ball out of your glove and getting your arm up and all this different stuff before the foot hits makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. None. Literally none. You need to be in a good position where your body can work for you when your front foot hits, and that's all that matters. The arm is the last thing to accelerate. So nothing before that even matters. Don't worry about anything before your front foot hits. Just get in a neutral position and don't mess yourself up. Then your arm is going to spiral. Be okay with the fact that you're going to lead with your elbow. That's important to do. Get rid of that terminology out of your head. And that's the second thing. Moving right along to tip number 3, your shoulders need to stay closed at landing. Closed meaning if you drew a line from home plate to second base, and then you took the angle of your shoulders, you would want to see your shoulders slightly closed, not slightly open. We don't want to open our torso early. We want to rotate our torso as late as possible. But that's going to happen by doing these first 2 things correctly. If you have some scapular retraction on your throwing arm side, it's generally going to help keep your torso closed. If you haven't done anything wrong and messed yourself up, you're generally going to land with a closed torso. If you do your lower half mechanics right, which I talked about last week, you're probably going to be in a good position to keep your torso closed. But understand when you're thinking about this that you want to rotate as late as possible. So it's almost like you're doing nothing with your upper body until your front foot hits. It's a relaxation almost. It's just delay. Just wait. Front foot hits, bam, now I can throw hard because I have something to rotate against. They don't tell you how to stay closed, and a lot of people think that it's the glove that keeps you closed, and that brings me to point number 4, which is your glove function. Your glove does not keep you closed. We talked about blocking with the front leg last week. We have to talk about blocking with the glove side this week. The glove side is your front leg for the upper half. It's another segment that has to stop before the next segment can go. If you land and your glove side is in front of your torso or is between your torso and the plate, that is not stopped. You can't now rotate and throw the ball without your glove side having to move. That's not efficient. Now both segments are moving at the same time and you can't efficiently transfer energy. You need to have your glove side outside of the line to the plate. So what I'm talking about here is if this is the plate and my shoulders are in line, if my glove side is here at landing, when I go to rotate, my whole body, my whole upper body has to rotate as one. But if I get my glove outside of my torso line, this is pulled and it's stopped. It can't go anywhere else. This is now the handle of the whip. Now I can rotate my torso around that and come towards the plate. I have a clear line to rotate towards the plate. You can't rotate towards the plate in a healthy way or an efficient way if your glove is between your torso and the plate. It's got to get clear. And what you actually find is you end up rotating through a point in your bicep. You don't rotate through your head. That's not the center of the arc. A point in your bicep is the center of the arc, and it's not circular, it's elliptical. So you're rotating in a circular fashion, but you're also moving towards the plate, and that's what creates this arm spiral and this launch and this, for lack of a better term, this extension. Just to recap it all. Number one, there's 4 things here. So number 1, don't mess yourself up. Don't do something dumb. Just stay neutral. Don't mess yourself up. Number 2, arm spiral. Be okay with leading with the elbow. Be okay with going into external rotation, all that different stuff. It's fine. That's what's supposed to happen. Tip number 3 is keep your shoulders closed. And you do that by, tip number 4, getting your glove outside of the torso line to the plate.
Long toss the other day, and I talked about the stretch. So for me, like, that's kind of my terminology that I use, is feeling that stretch and holding that stretch for as long as we can and building up that energy while we're, gravity's telling us to go, and then releasing. 3-pound counterbalance. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing opposite foot in front in a half kneeling. You'll see it. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get into that capacity just to feel, that stretch and feel that separation. For me, I like to over exaggerate, so that's what I'm going to do. The 3-pound counterbalance in my glove is going to just serve as more weight pulling me into that stretch to give me even more feedback of getting into that range. I'm also going to be throwing some weighted baseballs. This is a 12-ounce baseball. This is a 9-ounce baseball.